All right, hello and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale the Real Seeker. And just a quick little intro before we get into the debate show proper on the Skeptics and Seekers podcast. Me versus the atheist David Johnson on did Jesus abolish or fulfill the Old Testament? And I'm going to be arguing the biblical truth that he fulfilled it. But I just wanted to give a quick intro before we get into it because this was an extra long show and there was a technical glitch. So you're going to see the recording is going to end abruptly towards the end. And me and David, we're going to have to re record. We've set it up for February 10th next week. We're going to record part two. So it's being broken up into two parts. Just don't be off put by the abrupt ending at the end of part one here. We will be picking up from where we left off next week. But that was just due to a technical glitch. So we have to do some re recording. All right, with that said, let's get into the debate.
Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of Skeptics and Seekers Sunday Sermon. I'm your host, co-host, David Johnson. Um, I
And I'm your other co host, Dale from Real Seekers.
so let me just explain what's going on here. I'm obviously for people who are in the techno, um, using a headset for my video, so this is not actually me. And in my virtual screen, I got this when Dale hit record, I got this pop-up window that I can't get rid of. It's overlaid. Oh
That's just,
uh,
I like that there's proof for miracles because you're obviously up in heaven and your hands just appear out of nothing.
yeah, this has thrown me. This meeting is being recorded. The account owner can watch this recording. If it's like I didn't care about it. I just wanted to go away. What are
Can
we
you just
doing?
can you maybe just minimize it or
No, it's just it's near transparent overlay.
see because you have these
I don't want to
fancy.
mute. I don't want to stop video. Okay, I'm going to try to pop out video view. If something goes badly, okay,
All right.
I see you. I no longer see me. No, no problem. I don't need to see me. You tell me if you stop seeing me.
No problem, no problem. All right.
I mean, now I've just got a giant picture of you, like on a 60-inch TV floating in front of my face. That's
I can't imagine a more beautiful sight. So, I just
it
did
is
the
very
argument
this
for
is you have managed to derail me from the beginning.
all right, so David, we are here, co-hosting together to kind of follow up on a series that you've been doing on Skeptics and Seekers. Yeah, let me turn it over to you. Like, what has been this series that you did about a month ago?
The Old Testament. So, for people who haven't been around for a while, I've been doing most everything in series, for the main show. Uh, there was last summer the series of the Summer of Morality. There was actually a series before that, The Kingdom. After that, I don't remember the series I did in the fall. Um, and it was a little mini series on something. And then after that, the Old Testament. I think the Old Testament is probably as important, if not more important, than the Kingdom series. Now, a lot of people aren't interested in these topics. These aren't sexy topics, but I'll see if I can sex it up a little bit um, by saying this. If the Old Testament is and or was ever true, the New Testament is false. If the New Testament is true, the Old Testament has always been bogus. They cannot exist together.
Awesome. So you sort of take the abolishment view. Jesus abolished the Old Testament kind of thing. That's what you're arguing.
Um, I don't believe that Jesus abolished the Old Testament. I believe that Paul abolished the Old Testament, but it almost doesn't matter whether it's Jesus or Paul. It's the New Testament in aggregate. In aggregate, so the New Testament abolishes the Old Testament. I just wouldn't, one of the rare times I wouldn't throw Jesus under that particular bus.
Interesting. Okay, fair enough then. So, all right, and obviously on my end, as a Bible believing Christian, we know that that's not true. As Jesus himself told us, he didn't come to abolish the Old Testament or the law. Instead, he fulfilled it. And that's why there are certain changes. We don't have to follow kosher laws or be circumcised or stuff like that. So those are going to be sort of the positions. Now, just one thing to clarify. I'm sorry, I'm taking over here, but just one thing to clarify. So David is going to be making, from my understanding, his claim is that the New Testament contradicts or abolishes the Torah specifically. And that's his claim. Now he also believes that the Old Testament itself also abolishes or contradicts itself. So, for example, you would argue the prophets contradict the Torah, but that's not a part of this. That's not a claim in this show. Is
Right.
that correct as to your claims?
That's correct. There are ways that you can try to harmonize Moses and the prophets um, that aren't completely uh, terrible, but I believe that there is, in fact, a disharmony uh, between priest and prophet here. And it doesn't matter, though, because when I argue the Old Testament, just like the New Testament, even though neither is univocal, I take them in aggregate.
Awesome. All right, cool. So that'll clarify what my claim in the show. I'm going to try to establish my claim as well. All I need to do is establish that the New Testament is consistent in the fulfillment sense with the Old Testament. And on that basis, I can utilize any of the Old Testament scriptures to establish principles or my arguments. I'm not just limited to the Torah. And that's, obviously we could have another debate on, well, do the prophets contradict the Torah or not? But for the purposes of this show, as long as I can show the New Testament is consistent with Old Testament scripture, Protestant Old Testament scripture, I consider that I've succeeded in establishing my claim.
I
Uh,
will accept that. It's a dangerous grant for me, but I'm going to make a lot of dangerous grants. So I'm cool with that.
you like to live dangerously, do you?
I do. I think that the argument for my case is so strong as to be unassailable. I think that there are no defeaters, there are no reasonable objections to it. That said, um, convincing Christians of that is going to be nearly impossible. Nearly. Atheists don't really have a dog in the fight anymore. Um, and so they will listen to the logic and reason in literature. But Christians can't do that. Christians have to believe I'm wrong because the argument is existential for Christians. It's meaningless to me because even if I'm wrong, I'll just say, oh, okay, I was wrong on that point, still right on the million others, but it doesn't change anything for me. It changes everything for Christians. And so if my goal was to convert Christians to my way of thinking, I would give up now. I don't think it's possible. But as far as the logical and literary arguments go, I think my side is way easier than yours. Um, because all I have to do is read the text, and you have to do quite a bit more than that.
Not just a clarifying question, because it is interesting how you kind of characterize it with the atheists and then the Christians and stuff. An interesting middle ground. I didn't do this for our purposes, but one of the things I could have done was appeal to, well, forget Christians are biased according to you, and I would say atheists are biased, but we could appeal to Jews living at the time of Jesus. And if I use that, I think I could establish a lot of the New Testament reasoning just quoting non-Christian Jews. Would you consider that relevant evidence in potentially rebutting your arguments? Or
Yes, I would. This is another one of those dangerous grants, but um, yes, but I don't think it would help. You could find 50 Jews that were around in Jesus' day who agreed with Paul, and I would say that is a tiny drop in the bucket uh, compared to uh, the mass of Jews in Judea at that time. And so you would still be looking at a really small minority report.
okay, okay. I wish I did more of that then, because I didn't think you would accept that as relevant evidence. So okay, if I do come across something and I remember something, I might raise it and we can see
Yeah,
what.
that's fine. That is not out. I don't consider it out of bounds. I just consider. In fact, I can grant it all, and it still wouldn't put a dent in it because Jews were not univocal. Not all Jews believed that all 39 books that we have today were the Bible. Some Jews were Torah only. Some Jews were Torah plus prophets. Some Jews were Torah prophets and Jasher, where we go with that. And so they were not all univocal. They did not all believe in resurrection. They did not all believe that there was going to be anything like a heaven. Some maybe, some didn't. They didn't all believe in Satan and hell, but and that came kind of later with diaspora. So you could bring up a faction of Jews. I know of a few. Even if we just talked about the differences between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the huge differences between those two factions. Denominational differences may be bigger than Protestant and Catholic. And so the fact that you can come up with some Jews that believed certain things about the messianic age, I don't doubt that you can. It just doesn't derail the ultimate argument. And if push comes to shove, I would just go back to the original texts and say those Jews are wrong.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right, cool. Well, yeah, with that said, I think obviously, yeah, you're supposed to be running the show here and I'm taking over.
This is a conversation. Look, there's no
It's not.
forget that.
Okay.
It's fine. It's not like we haven't literally discussed this for a couple of hours before. So what we're doing now is adding a little bit more organization to it, and we've got a microphone on to do it so other people can hear it. So
Yeah.
let's just get going.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I'm
Go ahead.
gonna I'm gonna try to bring up my notes here. If I'm not looking directly at the camera, folks, it's because I'm not, and also there's no camera. Um,
And do you want to share your screen? I think you should be able to if you're a co-host. So
I did not see. Wait a minute. There may be a way for me to do that, but I don't really want to because I didn't set this up for screen sharing.
no problem.
So I think it would maybe screw up the video. I'm working with a digitally rendered 6 foot across screen. That's either going to render very badly or it's going to show up to be very tiny on the screen. I mean, we'd have to work on that. And it's not worth it. So, besides, we're talking to a lot of Christians, right, Dale? They know their Bibles.
Yeah.
Anyway, where am I?
If they're true
Let me
Bible
just stop.
Christians.
They have just ask any of them where Obadiah is. Count the seconds. They can cheat, and you will see that I am right about Christians not knowing their Bible. Um, all right, Old Testament. I have 6 points. They're all important. If you followed the series, Dale told me that my write up was 66 pages. I never actually changed the counter up to look at the number of pages. So that's an interesting number, though, considering that there's 66 books of the Bible. So thanks, Dale, for that. I don't know if that means that my write-up is inspired. I think it does. This might be God giving us a message that I am giving the new law, Old Testament. Um, we're going to cover the points, and I'm just going to say download for free the PDF that has all of the series in it. In fact, there are some things in the write-up that I didn't talk about on air. There's very little that I talked about on air that's not in the write-up, some, but not much. So I am not going to try to relitigate this whole series here. And I did not expect Dale to read all of that write up and listen to all of the shows. It's been a long series, a lot of content. So um, don't be overly harsh if Dale says something or misses something that you heard, 5 weeks ago and you saw it clearly in a write up. Okay. That's not where we're coming from. I've stated my uh, short thesis. Dale has stated his. And so we're just going to jump right into the points from there. We're going to talk about Abraham's seed. These are the land. I'm sorry, the promises. Abraham's seed, the land, the temple, the priesthood, reunification of the nations, and sacrifices. All right. All of these are crucial. All of these are promises. All of these are forever promises. So there's a lot here. We're not going to cover every bit of it, but I at least want to touch on some of it. And there's one scripture, ironically, in the New Testament that I want to spend a little bit of time in when we get to that point, which is almost the first point. So, Dale, if you don't mind, I want to set the stage with point one, and I want to read most of Galatians 3.
Sure.
Okay. Normally, my openings are pretty short, but this is not really an opening and it's not really short. So,
Do you,
God, go
oh,
ahead.
if it helps, because I know you don't like reading, do you want me to like get it on YouTube? Because you know those like audio Bibles. It's up to you.
No, no, we'll do a human reading. It's fine.
Okay.
If you want to open up a Bible and do some human reading, you can do that too. I'm going to start with um, Genesis 17, 1 through 8. So this is in the notes that we shared, Dale. I toyed with not publishing these notes, but I guess I will probably go ahead and publish them because they have scripture references in them. When Abraham was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and be blameless. I'm going to stop myself right there. What? This Abraham does not know God here. It was God just popping up saying howdy. And so we see the beginning of something here that's a little weird. Walk with me, walk before me faithfully and be blameless. What is God asking Abraham to do here? Well, if we are not to dismiss this out of hand, which I'm inclined to do, then God must believe it's possible for Abraham to walk before him blamelessly. The Christian says it's impossible to walk before God blamelessly. The Christian is wrong. They've missed some things in their Bible, but that's what they would say. And Paul's argument is something like that. They draw from Paul, suggesting that you can't do it. And so we're going to get to some of that here in just a moment. But God opens this up by saying, be perfect, essentially. And Abraham has to understand that as either, okay, well, this is something doable, or God is screwing with me. Listener, you decide. And this is God in his own voice here. This is not some prophet said that God said. This is God said. All right, then I will make my covenant between me and you, and I will greatly increase your number. Abraham fell face down, and God said to him, as for me, this is my covenant with you. Okay, so we got to listen to this. We've got to lean forward and hear what God is about to promise. And this isn't the last time God makes promises, but it's vitally important. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations. I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants, plural, after you, for the your descendants after you, for the generations to come, to be your God, tribal God, and the God of your descendants, again, tribal God, after you, the whole land of Canaan, which is described later in a few places, where you now reside as a foreigner, I will give as an everlasting, there that goes again, possession to you and your descendants, plural, again, after you. And I will be their God, tribal. Genesis 17, 1 through 8. Yes, I made a lot of under the breath commentary there, but this is kind of the beginning of the promises and the covenants. Uh, I We could look at this as a single standalone Abrahamic covenant, and then the covenants that follow as their own standalone covenants. Some people do that. Uh, I come from the camp that sees basically one covenant, and that this is the first part of it. So that might be important in this conversation. We didn't talk about that when we talked before, Dale, but this is one place where an attack, I think, could be made. Now, if you will allow me to jump over, and this is the longest I plan to talk all at once, I'm going to jump over to Galatians chapter 3, and I'm going to start with verse. Man, I'm going to go a little bit earlier than I wanted to. Verse 6. Thus Abram believed in God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. You can be assured that those who have faith are children of Abraham. Small stop there. What are you talking about, Paul? We just read that the children of Abraham were literally the children of Abraham. He made a promise to Abraham that Abraham could comprehend. This had nothing to do with faith. This had to do with seed. It had to do with semen hitting egg. That's what it had to do with. It had to do with DNA. It didn't have to do with faith. But Paul has flipped this already. And this is actually before the reading that I wanted to get to. It was credited to him as righteous, therefore you can be assured, just an empty claim. Those who have faith are children of Abraham. No, they're not. Because scripture foresaw, no, it didn't, that God would justify the Gentiles by faith. No, it didn't. It declared the gospel for beforehand. No, it didn't. To Abraham, saying, in you all the nations will be blessed. That has, I'm sorry, I don't even have time to go there. That's a 5-minute digression. For this reason, those who have faith share the blessings with Abraham. I'm going to continue for a little while longer. The curse, this is subtitled The Curse of the Law. This is Catholic Bible. They do a lot of subtitling and things. In contrast, those who rely on the works of the law are under a curse. When did the law become a curse? For it is written, cursed is everyone who does not persevere in doing all the things that are written in the book of the law. Now it is evident that no one is justified before God by the law. Wait a minute, when did that become evident? For the one who is righteous will live by faith. However, the law is not based on faith. Really? On the contrary, whoever does these things shall live by them. Christ redeemed us. Just a little bit more. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law. Now it's a curse again, by becoming a curse himself for us. as it is written, cursed is anyone who is hung on a tree, sidetracked for no reason. This is so that the blessings bestowed upon Abraham might be extended to the Gentiles. No, it's not. Through Jesus Christ, so that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. And we just have to tap on this next little bit here. The promises of the covenant. Remember the covenant that we read. Brethren, allow me to give you an everyday example. Once a human will has been ratified, no one can make further additions to it or set it aside, except you do. Now, the promises were made to Abraham. I wanted to show that the stuff that he's saying right now isn't just about Moses. It goes back to Abraham. The covenant that we just read was made to Abraham and his descendant, singular. This is weird because twice in the reading we had descendants. In the Hebrew, you might have something like seed as opposed to seeds. I used to hear that argument. Small digression. There's no plural of seed that is seeds, unless you're talking about plants. The seed of a person is all of their descendants. That is the seed. Okay, its seed is in itself naturally a plural word. Paul is high and drunk. And in English, it's just worse. And you can go through any number of English Bibles and see this for yourself. So Paul is making a distinction here. He said descendant, not descendants, except it does say descendants. Back to the reading. It does not say, and your descendants, Paul, yes, it does. As referring to many, yes, it does. But it says, and to your descendant, that is to one person who is Christ. This is what I am saying. The law, which came 430 years later, cannot invalidate a covenant that had been previously ratified by God so as to nullify the promise. I don't know if you'll want to get into that part or not. I think it's too convoluted to even think about. Obviously, if the inheritance came from the law, it no longer comes from the promise. However, God bestowed it on Abraham through the promise. And the very last piece here, why then is it added? Talking about the law. Because of transgressions. The Old Testament says nothing like that, though, Paul. Until the descendant, there's Paul on his kick, appeared to whom the promise had been made, and it was promulgated by angels through an intermediary. Now, an intermediary is not necessary when there is only one party and God is one. I will stop there. But what Paul has done is completely disintermediated Abraham and his seed from the ultimate promise. Paul is saying that was just a kind of a spiritual, mystical language. It's really just talking about Jesus. It doesn't have anything to do with Abraham at all. We have traveled that far from the original promise to Abraham's madness in Galatians. And this is what I think Dale is going to try to defend. So take it away.
All right, so that's your opening kind of thing.
You could call it my opening. It's also point one. So just roll yours into a long speech because I'm tired of talking.
Okay. So yeah, we can do this point by point. However, before I get into the first point, the specific point David has about this promise about the descendants and the seed, just some general things from my blog, which I'll post up on my blog, and David, you can post it up on SNS for the skeptics there and stuff.
Gladly.
So in general, there are certain principles that the Torah and the Old Testament itself gives us with respect to the covenant, commandments, and promises that we need to be aware of. So, in the first place, does the New Testament itself, Jesus himself says explicitly, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill them. So, on that front, I think this debate is incredibly important and necessary for Bible believing Christians and true Christians to defend, because otherwise we make Jesus a liar in Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 to 20. And this is crucial. Every other false prophet, Muhammad, Joseph Smith, cult leaders, cargo cult, they always latch on to Christianity, Jehovah's Witnesses, they always latch on to Christianity, but they have to go, oh, but the reason you're not seeing our faith is because the scriptures are corrupted. So really the scripture said originally what I'm telling you now. Jesus is unique in saying, no, no, the scriptures are exactly right. And I'm not contradicting them. I fulfill them. So I think this is a very important aspect, both evidentially and also essentially, because otherwise it makes Jesus a liar. So this debate is incredibly important. We are not just New Testament Christians, we also defend the Old Testament because Jesus is the fulfillment of it. Now, just a couple of principles. So the law, the commandments, and the covenant promises are explicitly said in the Torah itself to be conditional. In the ancient Greek, plerou is the word, right? And this goes back in the first place. I have a quote from the Mishnah. So Jews living at the time of Jesus, but between the first century BC and the second century AD, regularly accepted this. They understood the Torah as a quote unquote living document, one that can be adapted within the strict guidelines or parameters of the Torah's commandments. And this was done to reflect changing times and conditions. So here's an example, quote unquote, when murderers increased in number, the right of breaking the heifer's neck was annulled. When adulterers increased in number, the application of the waters of jealousy ceased. And this comes from Rabbi Johanan ben Zakkai, who annulled these commandments. So, in the first place, Pharisaic Jews, rabbinic Jews, the predecessors of the rabbis, which is the only form of Judaism that survived to the present. So, Sadducees, Essenes, all of those other Jewish sects at the time of Jesus, we know they were not inspired by God, because if they were the true line, inspired, authoritative sect of Judaism, they would have survived to the present day. The only ones that did were the Pharisees, and they also claim to have an inspired oral Torah. So they're claiming an inspired interpretation, whereas the Sadducees and others didn't claim inspiration. They were kind of really godless atheists. They didn't believe in an afterlife and stuff like that. They were more kind of just, let's go along with the Romans and say whatever we need to do. So I think that if we're going to look at that, the rabbis do have some kind of claim to authority that might need to be rebuffed and stuff like that from David. They can't just be dismissed. However, this sentiment among these non-inspired Jews, I would say these rabbinic Jews, is also comes from the Old Testament itself. And really what we see is all of all the commandments and promises in the Bible, especially the ones that are said to be quote unquote olam, the Hebrew word for forever or permanent, or also translated throughout our generations, meaning a long, long time they would be instituted. Jews have not been able to keep more than 75% of these because it was simply physically impossible for them to do this unless they had sovereignty over the Holy Land of Israel. So for 2,000 years, they couldn't do it. During the Babylonian exile, they couldn't do it. Also, they couldn't fulfill the commands related to a standing tabernacle or temple. There were periods in history where they had no temple or had no tabernacle. And yet that's not a problem for the Jews of the Old Testament. They didn't see that as, oh, we have a false promise. We have a falsified covenant with God now. Same with the other commandments require a functioning priesthood. So my point here is that there is this inherent conditionality, right? Where the Bible as a living book recognizes practical limitations and will cater to that and say, well, okay, it's okay to uh, not annul or to not enforce the covenants and or to expect the promises under certain practical limitations, conditionally speaking. And again, if you think about the commands, King David ate the showbread, right? Oh, that you can't do that. No, but it's a living document. You can't do that under normal circumstances. But if you're starving to death, what's more important? Oh, yeah, you can eat the showbread in that case. So there, that's my first point. General point is there is this principle that the law is conditional upon practical applicability, and it recognizes that there are times when there are limitations, and on that front, you can't even enact 75% of these forever commandments and stuff. So, and that's not a problem. Again, no, none of the prophets, none of the Jews, none of the authors of Kings and Chronicles went, oh my gosh, this is a breach. So this establishes the same principle upon which Jesus operates when he comes in the Messianic era. So that's the first aspect. These are not unconditional conditions of the covenant. They are not unconditional promises and or commandments. Furthermore, we know that there is an element of contingency. The law of Moses itself says both the commands and the promises of the covenant are contingent. Contingent upon what? On the faithfulness, going back to Abraham, and we'll get to him in a second, the faithfulness, the obedience, and the repentance. In other words, having the right internal factors of worshiping the one true God. And when the Israelites disobeyed and turned from God or were unfaithful to God, oh, then God would eventually turn his back on them, abandon the covenant, and punish them. They would be thrown out of the land into exile. Their temple would be destroyed. Their nation would be destroyed, and stuff like that. So there is this inherent contingency depending on what free will Jewish agents do and how they respond, um, that determines whether or not these things would remain in effect or whether they would be rendered, to use a legal term, null and void, so to speak, for a temporary time. Okay, so that's my second, and this again perfectly corresponds to Jesus because Jesus, as the Jewish Messiah, we see this focusing down of Israel's mission was fulfilled in the Messiah, the ideal representative of Israel. So it all fits perfectly, and I'll just quote biblical scholar Douglas Moo here, who puts it, quote unquote, Jesus was quick to clarify that his authority did not negate, but affirmed and brought to completion. That's that Greek word pleroo, brought to completion. Jesus brought the Old Testament covenant to completion. It's completed its purpose, right? It served a purpose. And once that purpose was fulfilled, now we're going to get a new covenant, as
I'm
Jeremiah.
sorry to
Sure.
jump in. Could you say that last paragraph again? I honestly was thinking about a point that you were making earlier.
Okay.
So what passage were you citing there
I
about
was
the
quoting a
completion?
scholar, Douglas.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. All right.
Um,
That was not an attempt at a gotcha. I thought that you had cited a passage that I was not familiar with, and I just wanted to figure out what that was.
yeah, no, I was just giving a quote from a scholar. But if you want a passage for this, so
No, no,
Deuteronomy.
no, no, no. Don't. I felt hesitant to
No, that's
interrupt at all, but I thought I missed something really important, and I was so I apologies.
yeah, no
Get
problem.
get back on
Well,
your horse. I'll
well, I'm
hamstring it
glad.
later.
Yeah, I'm glad you did because it's important. I made this claim about the contingency. Okay,
Mm.
well, what's your scriptural proof? In the Torah itself, Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 1 to 2 and 15, it says, now it shall be if you diligently obey and are faithful to the Lord your God, being careful to do all his commandments, which I'm commanding you today, that the Lord your God will put you high above all the other nations of the earth. And all these blessings and promises will come to you and reach you if you obey the Lord your God. But it shall come about if you do not obey the Lord your God, to be careful to follow all his commandments and be faithful to his statutes, which I am commanding you today, that all these curses will be upon you and overtake you. So it's in the Torah itself, it's inherent that all these things are contingent. The covenant is contingent, not absolute. Um, so yeah, and that's what the Douglas Moo quote I was saying is that the covenants serve a purpose, kind of thing. The commandments and promises and stuff like that in the Old Testament serve a purpose for in salvation history. But once they are completed, there's no longer a need for them. And then a new phase can come in. And on that front, if you want a scripture, obviously there's Jeremiah chapter 31, I believe, that speaks of there will come this time. Once the Old Testament, the Old Covenant is completed and we no longer need this outdated tutor. Now a new covenant, a better one, a spiritual one, written in your heart, where the commandments will be written in your heart, the essence and the intention for why I gave you these Old Testament commandments and stuff, that will be fulfilled and imprinted upon the hearts of all Holy Spirit-filled Christians. So those are my main principles in general that we have to keep in mind. David treats these as though they're absolutes, and that's not what the Torah itself says about these covenants. Now, let me get to his first specific example. Hopefully, I'm not too boring or taking too long there, David, but
My throat is sore. I'm happy to not talk. I'll mostly do sniping after this. So,
okay, so the covenant with Abraham, I'm going to forget about the part about the land because that's going to be his second point. So I'm going to take that out. But David uses the quote about the land to tie it to see it's about genetics. The descendants are your genes and stuff like that. But okay, so the first thing is God fulfilled the covenant with Abraham. The first part, right? Then I will make my covenant between me and you. This is Genesis 17, verses 1 to 8, and will greatly increase your numbers. Fulfilled already by Genesis chapter 25 records that by the time of Abraham's grandkids, this prophecies were totally fulfilled. And God said to him, as for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. Fulfilled. Just read about Abraham's 12 grandkiddies in Genesis 25, who were kings of Gentile nation states. And also, obviously, there was Isaac. No longer will you be called Abraham. Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you the father of many nations. Confirmed by Genesis 25 and beyond. I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. Every historian, PhD historian in the world says, yeah, this was fulfilled before the end of the book of Genesis, kind of thing, right? So it's recorded specifically in Genesis 25, and the immediate descendants of Abraham became kings of many nations. And secular historians know about these nations. A lot of them died out around the 8th century BC. Unlike Muslims who claim, no, one of them from Neoboth went on and became the Arab nation. That's all historical bunk. But they did become great nations with great kings, at least until the 8th century BC, according to secular historians. So that's absolutely fulfilled. Now, what about the second part? I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant. So again, that the word everlasting doesn't necessarily mean eternally at every single time or for all time, all temporal instances and stuff like that. But it means it can mean permanent or throughout all generations, given a certain starting point, blah, 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 or for a very long period of time. There are different meanings to this word everlasting here. But think about it. It can't mean at all times because, well, God didn't establish this covenant between him and you and then your descendants. Well, the Old Testament Moses came centuries after Abraham. The law, the Torah, didn't come right away. It wasn't there for Abraham. It wasn't there for Isaac. Jacob and Joseph and stuff like that. So even just right there, it took time for it to get started, type thing. But that no Jew saw this as a breach of the promise here. Um, okay, and so you for generations to come, interesting, for generations to come, that seems to be implying, oh, there could be generations where maybe it's not true, such as during the Babylonian exile or something. To be your God and the God of your descendants after you. And then we get into the whole land of Canaan, where you now reside as a foreigner. I will give an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you. So, what do I make? David says this is about DNA. Well, no, it's not. And, okay, is the New Testament a good source for that? No, the heck with the New Testament. Let me quote the Old Testament. Ruth actually disproves that it has nothing to do with genes at all, right? So in general, yeah, the Jewish offspring were important to ancient Near Eastern people and that sort of thing, but it wasn't this absolute thing that it had to be genes. You could be a foreigner adopted into the covenant of Israel as a foreigner, like Ruth, who was a Moabite. She was adopted in. She became Jewish. She became a beneficiary of the promises of this covenant, Abrahamic covenant, but she had no Jewish genes in her blood. Um, and yet she was a foremother of King David, the greatest king, the predecessor to the Jewish Messiah. So clearly, it's DNA, while important to the ancient Near Eastern primitives, right? Their thinking at that time um, wasn't absolute. It wasn't necessarily what God had in mind. And he gives us this hint throughout Israel's salvation history that, well, actually, remember, there are foreigners as well, and you're all equal. So, no, David quotes in his blog a thing from Jesus where Jesus says God could, in opposition to the Pharisees, he says, well, God could easily raise up Jewish people from among these stones.
It was John the Baptist, but
Oh, sorry, John the
yeah,
Baptist.
it's okay.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. Sorry about
I
that.
made that mistake when I first wrote it, so
Oh
never.
no.
Yeah.
You've exposed me. I'm a fraud. I've never read the gospel joke. But yeah, so like David takes this as an example to see, you see, the genes don't matter and stuff like that. But that's not what John the Baptist is saying here. What he's doing, he's putting the Pharisees in play. He's not saying the Jewish ancestry is irrelevant. That is clearly a part of the promise, though not an absolute part of it. But yeah, Jesus was speaking, God was giving this promise to ancient Near Eastern people in the time of Abraham, and their seed, their literal seed, was important to them. And it was important to the Jews of this time to be of the seed of Abraham in order to be a part of the Mosaic covenant and that sort of thing. But what God is saying is that the Pharisees were saying, we're so special. Look at our genes. We're better than all you Gentile pigs and stuff like that in virtue of our genes. But John the Baptist isn't saying, no, 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 your lineage is totally irrelevant and stuff like that. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, look, it's irrelevant in a spiritual sense because you're not inherently better just because you've inherited Jewish genes and you're a son of Abraham and therefore you're privy to this covenant, and these ignorant Gentile barbarian fools are off in ignorant land, doing whatever in their perversion and sinful perversions and stuff. You're not better. God could make genes out of these rocks. He can create ex nihilo your Jewish genes and create better Jews than you, better people than you, and stuff like that. But he's hinting that it's not important. It's not you're not inherently better. You got lucky. Abraham was selected by God, not because him and his genes are better than everybody else's, but because of his faithfulness. And it's in light of that, you were just externally selected to be put in this better position. And basically, you Pharisees got lucky. There's nothing special about you. And there's another verse, David, you remember in the Bible, I think it's the Old Testament, that says that the Jewish people are pigs. They're the lowest of all peoples. And that's why God chose them to save all of humanity, because They were the lowest. They were the most pathetic, the most pitiable. And God is so great. He can take even the lowest of peoples to accomplish his mighty will over and against all the great pagan nations of the world. I forget where that is, but I remember it's the Bible says something about along those lines about the Jewish people. So that's the point John the Baptist is making. Your genes, your ancestry doesn't make you special. That was just externally selected. You're not inherently better. So that's all that is saying there. Um, Yep. Okay. So I mentioned about genetics. So yeah, I gave the example of Ruth. Ruth was not born an Israelite. She was a Moabite woman who married into the Israelite family, into the Israelite covenant, despite her foreign origin. And she is hardly alone. There are tons of other examples of foreigners or Gentiles who became Jewish seeds of quote unquote seeds of Abraham through the adoption process, or the marriage process as well. Um, all right, what else do I have? Okay, and here's where I also quote Jeremiah 31 about the new covenant. So remember, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant that they broke, that I was their husband, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days. I will put my law within them. Again, Old Testament here, spiritualizing and telling us about this spiritual new covenant, just like what Jesus in the New Testament and Paul teaches. The law will be within them, and I will write it on their hearts. It's not about just extrinsic, mindless rituals and stuff like that. Um, no, there's a deeper spiritual meaning now with this new covenant. And this is even in the Old Testament, God's priority was a spiritual circumcision. So you'll note there's a verse about circumcision. God has always wanted more from his people than just external conformity to a set of rules. He always wanted them to possess a heart of love, know, and follow him. That's why God is not concerned with circumcision of the flesh. This is Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 4. Circumcise yourselves to the Lord, circumcise your hearts, you men of Judah and people of Jerusalem, or my wrath will break out and burn like fire because of the evil you have done. Circumcise your hearts? Well, if you take that literally, my heart doesn't have foreskin on it, and stuff like that, right? So, um, even in the Old Testament, my point here is that we see this spiritualization. This is not some novel thing that the Apostle Paul and the New Testament writers just cooked up to commit a fraud, as David argues here. And that's the last thing I had to say about the Abraham seed thing. So yeah, back over to you, David. Sorry, that was really long, but
Yeah, no, that's fine. Mine was long too, but mine was long because I read the Bible. Um, so let the,
I
let
read
the
the Bible too.
listener, yeah, a little bit, it's tiny bit uh, of out of context. Um, look, I've covered the Jeremiah stuff fairly extensively in this series, and so I don't think it's fair to the listener to try to completely relitigate that again. I will say as little as I can, but I guess I have to say something. The new covenant that is written on the heart is not the no covenant. And the law was still the law. And if you read that entire passage through to its end, and maybe quite a bit more of Jeremiah than that, because Jeremiah is a pretty important prophet, you will see that they were looking forward to a time when the law would be perfectly kept, not discarded, not changed. Uh, the only difference was that it was written on the heart as opposed to written on a page that wasn't accessible to people who still expected obedience. And you see things like prophets and sacrifices and Levites and all this stuff that Christians don't like to talk about that are part of this this new covenant. And so when Jeremiah talks about that, he's not envisioning an abolition of what they know as the law. Secondly, I said up front, and here I will try to stick to my word, but I will just mention I am taking the Old Testament in aggregate, but I did say, but I do believe there's a major difference between um, the well, not just the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but the law and the priests and the prophets. They did not see the same thing. They were not saying the same thing. They were not univocal about this at all. And so I think that Jeremiah, if he had said what he said in Moses' day, Moses would have stoned him. So I don't even think they were the same religion as far as that goes. But you also see prophets that say things like God requires mercy, not sacrifice. Well, if you take that, then all of a sudden, no more sacrifices. Yay, we don't have to do that. No, that's not even what that prophet was saying. I would say that he's being very loose with language. And again, you may not want to say that to Moses's face, because he would say, no, he requires sacrifices. Let me explain the sacrifice to you. Let me have you just read the book of Deuteronomy and Numbers and Leviticus. So you can see for yourself what sacrifices the Lord absolutely requires. And so I do think that the prophets were more of a spiritual, not religious group, as opposed to the priests, which were religious and spiritual, but mostly religious, obey or die kind of thing. The prophets were more of it's about the heart, but they are not univocal. They are not saying the same thing, and so it's very hard to take it all in aggregate when there are such major differences. But I just wanted to point out that even Jeremiah, out of context, is not saying uh, what Dale is trying to present here, which is to say, no more law. It's not even close to that. But they were not as litigious as the priests. So I will give that. I had a question for you about one of the first things you said, though, the Pharisees. So those were the real Jews?
Yeah, I think that they were the closest to.
That will come news to a lot of hearers because Jesus didn't treat them like the real Jews.
Well, obviously they were not real. They were not biblical Jews. Obviously, that's why Jesus opposed them. But they were the closest of it. If you look at
Okay,
the New
if they're
Testament,
not biblical Jews, they're not Jews. I don't.
sure.
There's no allowance for whoever comes closest.
Yeah, I think you're correct on that. Like I said, I was just using them as like, see, this isn't just a Christian thing. There's precedent in the most authoritative thing of Jewish sources, the ones that have actually survived today, that basically the closest thing, if Judaism is the true religion, it would be them. And it couldn't be Sadducees or Essenes or any of the other groups. So
Okay, I would have gone Sadducees, but it's irrelevant to me because I think the Jews didn't exist at all in Jesus' day. Um, so none of them were the real Jews.
okay.
Um,
I agree technically, yeah. So yeah, fair enough if you want to dismiss that.
I I I do. Now, as far as the quote that I was asking about earlier, and I really wasn't trying to do a gotcha. My mind just slipped for a minute, and I thought I remembered you saying a scripture reference, but um, I also was willing to grant, uh, I call it a dangerous grant, that sure you can bring up some sayings of some rabbis um, that were somewhere with around the time of Jesus. Heck, take it 100 years after the time of Jesus. Uh, Fine. Uh, that's one rabbi's opinion. The the opinion held by rabbis, especially at that time and today, are so varied and diverse on everything Jewish. there is no Orthodox Judaism. I don't know who would be called Orthodox. I think that I would call Orthodox Moses's Judaism, but Moses's Judaism didn't exist, and hadn't existed for a long time before Jesus came. So Judaism technically was already dead. I sometimes treat it a little bit more kindly than that and say it was dying uh, around Jesus' day in the New Testament, and so they were trying to save it. But it was what they were trying to save was already a fake. Um, so I don't think that you can find uh, historical Orthodox Judaism um, almost anywhere. And so I could cite archaeological studies. If we want to talk about trying to find evidence of when people were practicing uh, Jewish law, and that doesn't actually begin until around the middle of the second century BCE. Um, so I don't know if I posted those videos during the show, but I can try to hunt them down if in case I didn't. Um,
I will get.
so I
Oh,
would I would I just wanted to say about that part about the Pharisees. It's interesting and it seems almost counter to what you read about in the New Testament. And I'd not heard anyone say those would be the closest to the real Jews. And I I I find that I want to debate that, but I didn't come to debate that. But I strongly disagree with it. At least that's my first take.
interesting. Okay, so interesting. So in the first place, I totally agree with you. And if you go back to our old SNS shows on Messianic prophecies, you'll see that I agree with what you're saying. Biblical Judaism was dead at the time of Jesus in terms of the mainstream groups, right? The Pharisees are not biblical, practicing biblical Judaism properly, and neither are any of the groups and stuff like that. But
Right.
I use that because maybe I made a false assumption, at least at the time when we did our show on Messianic prophecies. You seemed to use rabbinic Judaism, modern rabbinic Judaism, as like, well, hey, these guys are authorities and they know how to interpret their Bible better than Christians on stuff like that. So I made a false assumption. Maybe you've changed your mind. If so,
Oh
great.
no, I
Yeah.
haven't changed my mind about that, but I think my claim was more limited than maybe you took it. So let me take a
Okay.
swipe at it again. I think the closest people to the inheritors of Judaism are current Jews, not Americans. Right. So if we're going to find what, look for Jewish studies and see what Jewish people uh, believe and believed about the ancient texts. You talk to people who claim those ancient texts as their own. Moses is dead, so we can't ask him.
Mhm.
Uh, but we do have, very large and diverse Jewish communities who are also not univocal. But you can ask almost all of them, minus the Messianic Jews, and they would more agree with me than Christians.
Okay. So just one question, because I have 4 points I want to make. So just one question on this, and just a question. We don't need to go down it, but I find it interesting that you questioned that Pharisaic Judaism, I think, is the closest to Christianity, and I think
Mhm.
it's dripping on the pages of the New Testament. The New Testament writers and the early Christian disciples of Jesus, these are not Sadducee Jews. These are not Essene Jews. These are most closely aligned with Pharisaic Judaism. Would you agree with, again, there's differences. That's why Jesus is saying you guys are full of garbage and all this stuff. But like, would you agree that of the first century Jewish groups, the Pharisees are closest in theology to the Christianity represented in the New Testament scriptures?
Do you mean, well, I'm not sure I understand the question, but let me take a swing at the parts that I do understand.
Okay.
Um, so it's been a while since I dove into the various factions of Jews, and so I'll have to look at it again. But my understanding, my broad brush remembrance of Pharisees and Sadducees was that the Sadducees were Torah only,
Right.
people, and they believed in strict uh, observance, whereas the Pharisees were uh, almost the liberals of the Jews, and they believed in broad interpretations and the acceptance of other texts and so forth. You could negotiate with the Pharisees. You couldn't negotiate with the Sadducees. And I see Judaism as in itself intrinsically um, non-negotiable.
Hmm.
And therefore, the people who are saying this is the law and these are our sacred texts and this is what it says and this is what you have to do, I consider them truer Jews than the Pharisees who say, the law, circumcision, that's not Judaism. That's modern Judaism. but they would have been stoned to death in Moses' day.
Okay. Okay, cool. And it's not important. I because I withdraw the point. I think your counter is effective. I agree with it. So I withdraw using it as evidence or stuff. But I would just say, just in terms of that interesting question, it's the opposite. The Pharisees are the conservatives, the Sadducees are the godless liberal, Democrats and stuff like that. Like they're the ones that negotiate with Rome, and they're the ones in power in Jesus' day, right? So they only have the Torah. They're not faithful to all of God's inspired Old Testament scriptures. That they also are willing to compromise. The Pharisees will do so as well, but they're seen as much more strict. They're the ones straining in a gnat. Like, what do you mean you put five what's a measurement? 5 liters of liquid in this thing? Oh, you're going to hell and stuff. So yeah, whatever.
They were right. That is correct. You remember Nadab and Abihu were burned to heaven because they used the wrong formula for the fire. So,
Okay.
yeah, those people are right. You get the ephod measurement exactly right, or else it's over.
All right. Well, so I'm going to withdraw this quote about the rabbis because I take your point and I agree with it kind of thing. I was operating under a false assumption on your position. So, okay. Your first point that you raised then is, I think, irrelevant to the debate. And we said so at the beginning, right? You said that Moses would stone Jeremiah. They contradict it. So the Old Testament contradicts the Old Testament. And again, we said that's cool. That's a great show to debate. I would disagree with that, but that's not your point in this. That's not your claim
No,
in this show, so I can ignore
it
it.
is not. So I am accepting Jeremiah, um,
Yeah.
half-heartedly because some of the things Jeremiah says I use. But you just have to, it's like citing William Lane Craig. You can use some of the stuff and you can't use some of the other stuff. He's right about some things, wrong about other things. And so I'm just having to accept some of the baggage of Jeremiah and some of the prophets. But I am more of a priest rather than prophet guy. And so for the people aren't familiar with the debate with the literature, you're looking at least two traditions, all the way back to Genesis, the priestly tradition of and the prophets. Um, I think the priestly tradition was probably the better, truer, fundamentalist Orthodox Jew, and I think the prophets were something else.
Okay. 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 So that means then we both agree there's potentially then only two substantive points you made. So the first one I want to address that's remaining of the four. So Jeremiah disagreed with sacrifices. So again, that sounds to me like you're arguing the Old Testament contradicts here. But I just want to say Jeremiah does not disavow sacrifices in any way. And I actually looked this up for my debate with the Muslim Daniel the prophet.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, Jeremiah basically said what you were arguing, right? Like you were trying to say that circumcision in your heart, so you need this internal correct attitude. The external rituals are not good enough in their own rights. But he's not saying that, oh, you go away with don't do sacrifices, don't participate in the temple. These are commandments in this Old Testament period that are necessary, but they're insufficient unless you have a true contrite, repentant heart. Unless, and this is, what he says in Jeremiah chapter 7, verses 21 to 23, He says, I did not merely command them about burnt offerings and sacrifices, but to be like Abraham, faithful, right? And that's the key kind of thing. That faithfulness, that's where we get from Abraham, walk before me faithfully, not blamelessly. He wasn't walking blamelessly, but he was walking faithfully. And that combined with Jesus' future sacrifice is what allows him to be considered blameless from a forensic or legal perspective and stuff. And that's why Abraham was saved, kind of thing. So it's his faithful response and Jesus' future sacrifice together that's why Abraham could be blameless, kind of
Right,
thing.
but we're just kind of inventing the Jesus future sacrifice thing. That's not in there. Uh, the words of the promise are way more straightforward than that. If you walk faithfully before me and be blameless, then I. And so what you're doing is changing adding to the condition of faithfully and blameless to mean uh, blood of Jesus. Uh, so you might add that once you get to the New Testament stuff, but that's unknown here. That's unheard of here. Um, that was no part of what Abraham would have understood God saying.
Yeah, he just knows, look, my faithfulness is I'm saved because of that. I'm in a right standing with God and blameless because I'm faithful. He tells me to cut off my foreskin, I'll do it. He wants me
Right.
to kill
And
Isaac, I'll
and
do it.
that's all it was. It was obedience. It was trust and obedience. And
But
by the
that's
way,
not inconsistent with the New Testament teachings, right? It's not like,
oh, I think it's extremely inconsistent.
just because I would agree with you that Abraham, and sorry, I keep interrupting. Sorry about
No,
this.
no, no. It's fine. We're just talking here.
So I agree with you that Abraham, some Christians would disagree and say, well, no, there's the sacrifice of Isaac was predicted. He knew that about a resurrection and stuff like that. I don't go for that, right? So I would just say that Abraham had no clue, and as far as he knew that I have to be faithful, and that's going to be sufficient for me to be blameless and stuff like that. But nowhere does it say, well, faithfulness alone is what merits me as being blameless and being in this covenant with God and stuff like that. He's not denying the need for the sacrifice of Jesus and stuff. It's not there's not an explicit denial. So it's able to be harmonized. And I mean, it's obvious. Abraham knew about sacrifices, right? Like what if Abraham was walking in faithfulness, why would you need to be tested with sacrificing your son? What I mean, he already did the circumcision bit. What you know what I mean? So like that, I don't think you can
Well,
prove a contradiction there, kind of thing.
I think if I wanted to spend 30 minutes on this subject, I could do better, but it's not relevant. But what is relevant is the reason this came up is because you were using Jeremiah to say, "Oh no, circumcision is circumcision of the heart," and what I would be willing to grant is the exact same thing that you said, which is why there's no need to continue on this particular point. That didn't abolish circumcision. Just because you say circumcise the heart, that he doesn't go, oh, thank you, Lord, we don't have to be circumcised anymore. No, that's not what that's saying. And to use it to even sound like that's what it's saying is a misuse of Jeremiah.
Gotcha. Yep. So I would half agree with that. And I was just going to read a quote from my debate about sacrifices because you mentioned Jeremiah says not No, he still supports sacrifices, but it's just
Of
being
course he
done
does.
in the right spirit, right? So that,
Right. But
that
I
so
think that he's being loose with his words in the way that you might say Stephen in Acts was loose with his words. And those Jews heard exactly what they heard, exactly the way I'm talking now. And they're saying he's speaking against the temple, he's speaking against the law, let's stone him.
okay.
If they had heard or read Jeremiah, which was hundreds of years later, they would have stoned him too.
Okay, so I don't think, okay, so great. So here's the fourth and final point, and this is actually going to be relevant to countering what you said. I totally disagree with you that I agree that Jeremiah, in the context of the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, is saying, yeah, this needs to continue. Don't stop sacrificing, don't stop the circumcision, but he's stressing this need for doing it in the right internal state and spirit. But when it comes to the day of the new covenant, he's saying, yeah, even those things it'll be a totally new thing, totally new and spiritual. It'll be different. And here's my argument why. So if what you're saying is true, that's not a new covenant in any way. It's just the old covenant being reenacted. And Jeremiah didn't say that. I mean, you would agree, just as a yes or no, you would agree the new covenant for Jeremiah is future tense, right? It's not past tense, correct?
Correct-ish.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Ish.
Like he
Mostly yes, a little ish.
Okay. Okay. So let's see. So here's where I'm going because if what you're saying is true by this new covenant being within our hearts, that would have already been accomplished in the days of King Josiah before Jeremiah, right? Because he had this renewing of the old covenant, where he had the right intent. He rediscovered the Torah scriptures and started living according and obeying its things in his heart as well.
Mhm.
So if your interpretation is correct, Jeremiah should be saying, and look, we've already got the new covenant. It started with King Josiah. But
Yes,
no,
he should have. I would agree with that part of it. But the thing is, when you listen to Jeremiah continue talking, um, I think you're pushing him too far to the future. This is why I say ish. And he's not saying that we're going to change the covenant. He lists the change. One, it'll be written on your heart, presumably in a way that it wasn't before. Two, you won't be sinning anymore because you're evil, but you're going to be fixed, and God is going to remember your sins no more. And what was the third one? You won't have to tell brother will not have to tell brother about God because everyone will already know. These are the changes he made. It's not, oh, and by the way, there'll be no temple and you won't need to sacrifice. And the other 613 commandments, forget about those. It wasn't that at all. So it was a kind of restatement of the law, but we're going to fix a few things. And the things that they were going to fix were not the details of the law, but the implementation that there was going to be some kind of almost spiritual awareness and awakening so that people would follow the law. I have more to say about that maybe in another section, but um, I would also just again refer listeners to the excruciatingly long write up and look for that session. I talk about it a lot.
fair enough. Okay. Yeah, no, I'll let you get the last word because we're still just on the first point.
Yeah,
But
the others will go faster. However, I am going to ask you, my good friend, to take a moment to either vamp or go into your rebuttal of my second point, which I have not made yet because I've got to go pee. But I will still hear you.
okay.
So, but I got to get
You,
out of this chair.
so you want me to give the rebuttal before you give the case?
Hey, look, this is the show, man. This is what we do.
All
I don't
right.
think it's ever been done before. So, folks, this is a world premiere. You're about to hear a rebuttal before you hear the case.
All right, all right. So David's second point is specifically about the land, the Holy Land, basically. And so David gives kind of a side point, I would say, about the borders of it, but and how it's different, right? So again, he's saying the Old Testament contradicts itself in terms of what is the land of Israel, what constitutes this promise. But his main point with respect to our show, does the New Testament contradict the Old? Is that regardless of the borders, we can debate that some other time. There is this promise from God, that as part of the covenant, old covenant, you will have this land. And it means a physical land. It's not some new spiritual land up in heaven, like the new Jerusalem mentioned in Revelation. It's this physical land of Israel that we all know with these definable borders here on the planet Earth. And I agree with him that that's what the promises in the Old Testament are talking about. That seems to be crystal clear and undeniable, as to what the inheritance of the Jewish people is with these. And the nation of Israel. Obviously, there's an extension of that with people being grafted into the nation of Israel. That's not just a Christian invention. We have Ruth and other foreigners being grafted into the nation of Israel, even in the Old Testament. So that Christian concept of Gentiles being grafted in is fully Old Testament consistent there. But still, it's talking about physical land. And it's also true, David's mentioned, this promise has never been fulfilled up to these boundaries that have been mentioned. Right? We Jewish people did conquer the Holy Land and that sort of thing, but there are certain areas they were promised that they have never conquered in history up to this date. And so I think David says, well, this is a breach of the promise. Plus, the New Testament talks about a spiritual Israel or nation in the book of Revelation, right? And it represents that with this concept of the New Jerusalem. So, in the first place, I just want to say this. So, I agree that the Old Testament promises are focused on a physical land, but once again, these are conditional promises. It's not saying that the Israel would have this land forever. In the first place, it's proven right away that Israel, the Jewish people, didn't own all of these boundaries from when it was promised to them right away. It took time for the nation of Israel to grow right into the land of Canaan, and it took centuries, in some cases, to expand out to even the generous border at its most generous height, and stuff like that. So it clearly the promise is not meant for all time, and no Jew in the Old Testament, or let alone the person in Deuteronomy chapter 4, would even think that. Or sorry, Genesis chapter 15 is the citation David gives. But also remember the contingency that I said. So Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 40 says, you shall obey his statutes and the commandments that I give you today, so that you all may go well with you and your children after you, and that you may live long in the land that the Lord our God has given you. So the promise of the land is contingent. Are you a faithful Jew with the right intentions, or are you some sinful wretch that's pretending to be a Jew in light of your external genes and your, the rituals you perform, but they're just empty, menstrual rags in the nostrils of God? Well, if you're the latter, my promise to the land, no, you're going to be exiled. You're going to be cursed. It's going to be the opposite. So this promise to the land is explicitly said to be contingent in the Torah itself. Who cares about the prophets? The Torah itself tells us this. So there's no contradiction here with the Old and New Testament. Secondly, in terms of this New Jerusalem concept, is this inconsistent with a physical Israel? Well, no, it's not. Because if you look at what Revelation, for example, 21:1 says, it's this New Jerusalem is this total makeover of the new creation, right? The new heavens and the new earth, redeemed from sin. Satan and his ritual sinners are off in the lake of fire. They're in hell, they're quarantined. And so God has redeemed all of creation, new heavens and a new earth. That includes a new Jerusalem, right? So God completes the redemption of the physical city of Jerusalem, and this new Jerusalem comes down from heaven at the new creation and lands in physical Israel. It's still a physical city. It's a continuation of the same Jerusalem that we've always known and loved in the fallen world. And you might say, but isn't there? Oh, there's the destruction of the old Jerusalem and then the new Jerusalem, so there's no continuity there. Well, no, there's still continuity from an Old Testament perspective, because even Jerusalem has been destroyed, such as during the Babylonian exile, and rebuilt, and that's still seen as the same Israel. No Jew after the Babylonian said to themselves, "Oh shoot, I'm living in the new Jerusalem now because it's a new temple, it's a new city walls, and all these new buildings. So therefore, I have no connection to the time of the Israel of King Solomon." No, the promise goes through the physical destruction of buildings and walls and temples and stuff. It's still the same Jerusalem in 400 BC or in the time of Jesus as it was in the time of King David. despite the changes. And that's all that the New Jerusalem represents in Revelation 21, except that it's a complete makeover, sin totally gone. And it comes down in its rebuilt form, redeemed form forever, once and for all, on the new heavens and the new earth. But Jerusalem will be on earth. It'll be the new Jerusalem will be a physical city in every sense that Jerusalem today is a physical city, except it won't be contaminated by sin. And also, the Bible tells us that it will be much bigger. The boundaries will be much bigger. Maybe there's a future fulfillment for the boundaries David's talking about it, right? Because I think John, for example, records that the city is nearly 1,400 miles long. Well, I wonder if that's how big the city is, how big is the new Israel? Maybe it encompasses everything in Genesis 15 and the other verses and stuff like that. So David can't rule out a future literal fulfillment of these verses. And therefore, there's no contradiction in what the New Testament teaches in terms of the promise to the land that God gave in the Torah. Over to you, David. And I just want to say, David, first of all, you're muted, but before you unmute, David is proving the resurrection is true because he keeps appearing and disappearing literally on screen. Uh, Sounds like Jesus, right? Appearing and disappearing through walls. And so thank you for proving the resurrection, David.
Yes, I have declared many times that the prophecies are about me. Um,
Oh,
so,
goodness, you as the Messiah. Okay, I take that back.
boy, are you in trouble. So, don't worry, I am merciful. Um, so I did miss a little bit of it, but having had this conversation, I think I got the gist of it, but I might need you to recapitulate a little. So we're talking about the land,
Yeah.
and let me see if I can completely escape from my notes. There might be some small thing that I have to read here.
And
Uh,
bear in mind for the audience. So I'm just using, David gave me a 10-page summary. So that's all I'm using for my rebuttals. Like yeah.
right,
If
and that's what we call a summary, folks. Um, so, so that's there you go. So let me just read this one verse to bring my own thoughts back into order here. This is from Genesis 15, 18 through 21. I don't know if you read that through or not. Uh, uh, on that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram. To your descendants, I will give this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the dwelling place of the Kenites, and a bunch of other people, and the Jebusites. Amen. So the thing that I wanted to emphasize by starting this section with this verse is that the promise of the land was of land. It wasn't spiritual land. It was physical land with dirt and grass and rocks, and it was a certain piece of land. It wasn't just, I'm going to give you this amount of land. I'm going to give you this specific land, latitude and longitude land. There's nothing spiritual in this passage. It gets more spiritual as time progresses, and they don't have the land. So I would suggest that you cannot fundamentally, not logically, not literarily, not theologically talk about a new Jerusalem until you have the old Jerusalem. And the Jews never to this day had the old Jerusalem. That promise was never fulfilled. And so speculation about the new Jerusalem is pointless.
Can I ask a clarifying question that I didn't, because I didn't write out I quoted Genesis 15, but I didn't write out the quote there. And I realized so your contradiction here is that it's about the land of Israel in particular. But I note that this promise to Abraham, at least in Genesis 15, is to your descendants. So it's not just the Jews or the sons of Isaac, but it's talking about the sons of Ishmael, and in that front, like this could be said to be fulfilled. Like all the descendants of Abraham occupied these areas. So like, why are you citing a promise to all his descendants if the contradictions about Israel?
I don't think this promises to all of his descendants because Ishmael, the son of Hagar, was specifically cut out of it. His people had nothing to do with the promise. And Jacob and Esau, the promises weren't to Esau. I mean, God made Esau some, arrangements, but it was through Isaac and Jacob, not through every piece of DNA that Abraham spilled. So this much is clear even in the New Testament. Uh, so
Hmm.
the people of the promise, the children of the promise, never occupied all of this land to this day, and they never will in this version of history. It would have to end history for them to actually occupy this land.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that because I'm definitely going to challenge that in my rebuttal.
Okay, so I'm pretty much done. Like I said, I'm going to mostly be sniping. My speeches are going to be sound bites. There's no New Jerusalem without an Old Jerusalem. There are some things I could ask about the New Jerusalem that's being made up in heaven right now, and all of that, and it's going to, float down to earth, and it's going to land on where Jerusalem, I guess, was supposed to be, and smash whoever's there. I don't know how this sci-fi New Jerusalem is actually being envisioned, but what it is not is the promise that was made to Abraham, and we have to sort that out first.
Okay. Okay. So I've got two counters, and let's see how you. So the first one, I told you I'm gonna look. This is a I realize now, once you read the verse, and I'm seeing it, that this is a promise not to Israel only. This is a promise to his descendants, right? It includes Ishmael as well, and we know that because in the other promise, right? So the covenant promise is with Isaac, right? The covenant is through Isaac and his seed, and we know that's the Jewish people eventually, right? Through Joseph and that. But he also makes when he's making promises about kings and nations and stuff like that. That's to your descendants, plural, and it's talking about all these pagan lands. And that makes sense with, remember when we were talking about Abraham's seed, where he's talking about, I will make you the father of many nations. Well,
Yep.
obviously, that's not just the nation of Israel and stuff. So I think it is talking about pagan nations. If this is your proof text that you're using.
Uh, so anyone who's read the 66 pages knows that I don't have a quote unquote proof text. This is just the text that I'm using to highlight this particular point. Remember, this is a summary. So,
Yeah.
um, but that said, yeah, I would argue, counter argue, probably on a couple of fronts, but only one I think is needed. First of all, I don't believe you, but I will say that I have not heard this argument before, that it would cover Abraham's seed, including the ones who were specifically cut out of the uh, covenant. So I don't find that compelling yet. You would need to provide something more to me, I think, than that, because even the Old Testament seems to not be considering them um, in this stuff. But the other thing I would say, well, two other things. One, I cannot find a single expert in the Christian realm who believes that the land promise was completed. They all say it never happened, and that's the thing that they don't want to say. But they plant their hopes and dreams on future fulfillment. So I don't see a lot of people. I'm being a little bit exaggerative here. Um, you can find maybe someone who's out of step with consensus that says no, it was all done. But even conservative scholars are willing to admit, yeah, they never occupied that land. So as far as the land goes, they're not reaching for some straw like, well, if you consider these people and these people and these people, and the land was granted. So this is a new argument. I don't think it works. But the final argument for me, and I know that you've covered this, and this is just a fundamental disagreement. This land was a forever grant. And so when does forever start? Well, it didn't start then because they lost it. And it didn't start later because they lost it. It didn't start later because they don't have it now. Um, and so if forever just means here and there throughout history, that's not the same thing. I think that's a fundamentally misleading thing. If I say, I am going to make you, uh, the king forever, and the next year you're deposed, and you're deposed for 10 years, and then you come back for 6 months, and then you're deposed again, and you come back. That's not the fulfillment of forever. I can't just say, well, it was forever. Um, that's a radical departure of how language is used here. And so on at least two fronts, three fronts, uh, I I think that the land was not uh, ever conquered then. Scholars do not believe that it was conquered then, and I did search as thoroughly as I could. And finally, forever has to mean forever at some point. And I assume that your thoughts about the New Jerusalem that floats down from heaven and lands with a thud in Tel Aviv, that will be forever. And when you say forever there, I think you mean forever like everybody means it.
Of course, that's
If
Greek,
it
not
if
Hebrew, though.
well, okay, but if you're pointing to that to say, you see, it's going to be forever, then you can't mean it's forever as in an unbroken string then. But here, when he's making the promise to the people that it is a broken string, um, and so you have to be, I think, more consistent with that. So that would be my argument and counter argument.
Okay. Okay, cool. So I have the main counter where I think you're wrong, but I first just want to I just looked it up, and I think with Genesis 15 you are correct and I'm wrong. I was looking at it out of context, but there are Muslims, for example. I debated the Orthodox Muslim. He argues there's two covenants, one for Ishmael, one for Isaac. I don't agree with that, but I was sort of thinking along those lines, but it's no,
Yeah.
because it's talking about to your descendants, plural, right? So Isaac and multiple descendants because he had kiddies and stuff like that. But it is talking about one land. These are the borders for one land. So I think you're correct. This is about Israel specifically, this promise. So I was wrong there. But great, how do I counter? So again, the word olam forever doesn't necessarily always mean forever. It has different meanings, including permanent or for unto multiple generations or a lot of generations, or just another translation, a very long time, a long time. These are all just in terms of what that word olam can mean. So we have to look at the context and that sort of thing as to what it means. Now, in context, remember I brought up the contingency. We know for a fact, just from forget the New Testament, just from an Old Testament perspective, it's a fact that Jerusalem, old Jerusalem, if you want to call it, did not exist at every time in human history. Babylonian exile disproves that. Jerusalem didn't exist for 70 years or whatever it was. They were in
We
Babylonian
have no
exile.
disagreement there.
Cool. So there were periods of time, and including, it's not like Jerusalem just popped into existence. That had to come into being centuries later during King David's time. So there were centuries where it didn't exist, and
We
none
have
of the
no
Jews,
factual disagreement.
well, and none of the Jews went like, "Oh my gosh, God, you suck! You broke your promise." Like they
There
didn't
we have a
use.
little disagreement.
Okay, okay, fair enough. The point here is that my point here, my argument is that with these moments, the Jews and the biblical writers in particular did not see a discontinuation. It's not like they went, After the Babylonian exile, there was a new Jerusalem. There was an old Jerusalem that popped into the being at Abraham's time, and then it was destroyed somehow, and we never knew
Yeah,
about it.
I mostly agree with that too.
Okay, then King David made another Jerusalem. Oh, now during the after the Babylonian exile, we're on a third Jerusalem because it got destroyed and we had to
Hmm.
rebuild it.
Hmm.
So all these times where Jerusalem is destroyed and it comes back, the Jewish mind, the biblical Jewish mind is this is the same Jerusalem. It's a continuity of this same physical city. I totally agree with you. The promises are about a physical city, and stuff, but they see a continuity, not a discontinuity.
I think that some saw a discontinuity. Some felt like they were wandering and abandoned by God. But the whole uh, priest prophet, well, um, one of the differences is, and I think it's a little bit of what Paul was doing too in his day, what the New Testament writers are doing. But it's the question of what do we do since we've got some falsifiable promises hanging out there that are obviously not fulfilled. How do we get them fulfilled? Because if we can't, then our God is a liar and he's not a real God.
Mhm.
And since our whole identity is tied up into that, then we're not a people. So they have to come up with some kind of talking point that allows them to win a battle that they've lost. So when they are exiled, which is not supposed to happen, like I'll say we're supposed to have peace forever. Um, then you just say the prophets can just say, "Hey, we're a bunch of sinners. You're a bunch of sinners. It's your fault. It's not God. God's faithful. You messed up. Okay, we repent. Okay, God will accept you back. Oh, you sinned again. Looks like we don't have a temple. We don't have a land again. It must be your fault. It's just kind of that sort of um, way of saving a failed prophecy that you can read throughout the Bible. But even some of the prophets, maybe in Ezekiel, I get Jeremiah and Ezekiel confused sometimes because I read them together a lot. But um, when they're saying, okay, but God's gonna forgive you, and it's not gonna be because of you. It's not like you're doing right, but God's going to keep his promises. He's going to be faithful because he made these promises. It makes it sound like it doesn't have anything to do with you, but you're a bunch of sinners and God's going to one day bring it all back. All right. Um, because they couldn't let go of the promises, but they also couldn't help but acknowledge that they hadn't been fulfilled yet. Fairly late in the Bible, they could still acknowledge, oh, it hasn't happened yet, but there's going to be another time and it's all going to be fulfilled. And that just kept getting pushed down the road to by the time you get to the New Testament writers, it's like to heck with all of those promises. They are null and void. Forget about them.
So
Um,
fair.
so so we see a progression of that throughout the Bible.
So believe it or not, I disagree and I also agree somewhat with you. This is how the notion of the Messiah came about. There was this development, but I would say, but what you're arguing here really is that okay, the Old Testament contradicts the Old Testament, and fair enough, we can debate that's not the topic of this show. So
Right. And I'm trying not to argue that. I promise I'm not. And so you can take away all of my points from arguing that it's no big deal. But
so but
it's hard to talk about this stuff without talking about the stuff that you also know and really think, but is not necessarily germane to the topic.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you raising because it's making it clear for the audience that okay, maybe we should do this debate. Does the Old Testament contradict the Old Testament? Are there because that's a claim of skeptics as well. But I
It
just want
does
to make it
almost immediately, but yes, it does. It does.
fair enough. So yeah, I would deny that. So yeah, that's something we would need to debate, and that is a much tougher. I admit that's a tougher burden of proof on my end to say no. It's they're harmonizable and it is a thing. But I think I could do it. But for our purposes in this show, it's just about. So you would agree that the New Testament notion of the land, with the possible exception of the New Jerusalem concept in Revelation, taking that out for a second that is consistent with um, this notion of okay destruction, but there's this continuity. It's the same Jerusalem that's built, destroyed, rebuilt, destroyed. uh, the Jewish people could have seen it that way, kind of thing, and that's not a contradiction with the New Testament view.
Okay, it depends on whether you're talking about pre-70 or post-70. I think post-70, which I also believe most of the New Testament is written in, I think that's when you see the very definitive language of screw the temple, screw the land, we're doing a new thing, because it was just irrevocably gone at that point. There was nothing that they could do but spiritualize it,
But
because there was no hope of ever fulfilling it physically again.
okay. But pre-70, it was definitely this physical land, and none of the Jews at the time went like, "Oh shoot, we're living in the New Jerusalem," because the old Jerusalem was destroyed in Babylon in 500 BC. So they saw no, this is Jerusalem. It was destroyed and it's been rebuilt. We're in the same Jerusalem, the same Israel that God made the promises to Abraham and Moses about. Like they didn't see like, oh shoot, those promises were unfulfilled, and it has nothing to do with the Jerusalem we're living in because that's a totally different city from the ones prophesied in the Torah.
Well, I think I mean, you mentioned the whole thing about the new Jerusalem coming down from heaven. I mentioned that in my write-up. That is an example where there was a complete divorce of physical land. That it had gone to the point that they're saying, yeah, okay, stop with this fantasy that it's the same Jerusalem. It's not, but there's going to be a new one, and it's going to be made somewhere out of space, and it's going to come here.
Okay, so I disagree. So yes, you're correct. That's where I was going. My next point is that it's the in the exact same way there is this continuation in the mind of the Jews, despite temporal periods of destruction of the city and then it being rebuilt. It's still the same physical land of Israel and same city and stuff like that. The
Yes,
New
it's the same
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, and it's the same land that they never conquered and didn't conquer then. Jerusalem was just the city in that land, but the promise was not about Jerusalem. It was about the entire land of Canaan. Jerusalem may have been the capital city, but to narrow it down to just the capital city is to neuter the promise. The promise of land is 30 times bigger than what Jerusalem has now, and it's a thing they have never actually come close to having.
Okay, wait, but okay, so every single Jew, if you just want to focus on the land, then you understand my answer with the New Jerusalem is that it's the exact same thing. It is a physical city that will exist on earth, and it's just the continuation of Jerusalem, it being destroyed in God's final judgment and being rebuilt, stuff like that. But you
But
just
the
said
land,
that
the land of the promise is not that it would be destroyed. The land of the promise was that it was going to be eternal, and then the new land of the promise in the Old Testament, the new covenant thing, uh, that also said stuff about the land and the city and the temple, and you're gonna this is gonna last forever. And so it was always okay, but it's going to be renewed. Okay, but God's going to do it now. Okay, you sinners, but God's going to do it now, and it's going to last forever this time, and it just never does, and
but
that's why the New Testament, I think, has to terminate that at some point
but
and say, no, the land's of blight, forget it.
but my point is that like that's not what the Old Testament understands. They understand a continuation. Like the Jews post the exile believe they're living in the same city King David built as Jerusalem. And so it is living forever. And we, according to Revelation, we know it is going to live literally forever. Despite destructions and rebuildings, that's irrelevant. There is that continuity. That was
Well, it wasn't that the rocks and dirt will still be there. That wasn't the promise. The promise wasn't that the city isn't going to go anywhere. You know what? Big bodies of land seldom do. Right? That's not much of a promise. But the promise was that you will occupy Jerusalem, that
okay.
this will be your land. It will be free of enemies. You will have peace all around you.
Okay.
You will know the Lord, so forth. That was a part of the physical promise with Jerusalem. And so when I say that that never happened, I don't mean that somehow the rocks and dirt went away, and then when they came back, it comes back again. No, I mean the occupation of Jerusalem as a holy city was never um, a long-term reality for these people, and it certainly doesn't encompass all of what God promised with the land, which dwarfs the city of Jerusalem. It just never happened.
Okay. Okay. So two answers. So the first thing is in terms of the borders issue, absolutely historically fact. The borders ascribed for the nation of Israel, from my understanding, have never been owned by Israel. Some people have tried to say, well, Israel as part of the Roman Empire or the Byzantine Empire or as part of the Muslim Empire, yes, it owned all this land. I don't go for that myself. The land of Israel as an autonomous nation never had those borders, but the harmonization is it will in the future at the end of when Jesus returns at the second coming.
And we could do part two of this show then, and you can say promise fulfilled. But
Yeah,
until then, you can't say promise fulfilled. It's an
oh, for sure.
unfulfilled promise.
Well, yeah, but you can't say it's a contradiction. It's
I
the
could say
promise
it's an
isn't
unfulfilled
involved.
promise.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, yeah, I don't care about the term contradiction. I'm reading the promises. It never happened, unfulfilled. There's
Okay.
no such thing as a partial fulfillment. There is no such thing as a future fulfillment. Both of those things are unfulfilled promises in that
Well,
they're not fulfilled yet.
so
So
I disagree with. I agree that it's unfulfilled yet, but there is this notion we have. Jesus gave us the down payment because if he proved that by fulfilling all the promises he had to fulfill at the first coming that were time sensitive, then we are warranted in knowing this at a second coming all those promises will be fulfilled because he gave us the down payment. Obviously, you don't agree there is a down payment, so that
yeah, he wrote a bad check. It's bounced uh, way to the moon by now. So
we would debate that, yeah. But
yeah. I mean, I made a down payment on my house. If I stop making payments, the bank will collect it. So I can say that I own my house. It's not true.
sure.
I've made some
Look,
payments. That's a partial fulfillment. Guess what? I don't own the house.
okay,
Bank does.
as a Christian, I will say this: if you're obviously totally false, but and I've proven that in our shows. But just to take it out, if you are correct that Jesus wrote a bad check, I would agree with you that it follows. Okay, we should disbelieve that there is going to be a future fulfillment on this case. I would say this is probably a failed prophecy if Jesus did write a bad check at his first coming. But yeah, that's where we need to debate. Did he write a bad check or did he actually give us a great down payment?
Yeah. So if he says that he came to fulfill the law, and if this is the law and the prophets, which I interpret the law and the promises, because the prophets talk a lot about the promises, so that can be debated some other time.
Yeah.
If Jesus came to fulfill that, the land is part of it, and he didn't fulfill it. So,
Yet.
case closed.
Yet.
Well, yeah, I haven't fulfilled it yet either.
Yeah,
But
but you have to
but no one's
in order
given
to
me any
prove
credit for a down payment.
yeah, but in order to prove your case that there's an abolishment or a contradiction of this promise about the land, you have to prove that it won't come true. And
No, I don't. All I have to do is prove that it hasn't been fulfilled.
no,
And if the law is not abolished, but it won't go away until all is fulfilled, then if any part of it is not fulfilled, then it still stands and the New Testament does not.
okay, all right. So that's not true. Again, it's we have to understand the conditional, which ones are conditional, because remember, of the law, only 75% are conditional. Some are meant to be forever, such as the moral law and stuff like that. But anyways, I want to finish this point. My last
Sure.
point about the continuation things. This, I
Mhm.
think, provides proof that even the Torah, so this comes from Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 40. I quoted it before. The Torah understands it disagrees with you that Jews thought that there was a discontinuous Jerusalem throughout its history when it was destroyed and thing. No, it's the same thing because look, there's the conditional promise for the land. if you obey and are faithful to his commandments, you will live long in the land. This is specifically about the land of Israel that the Lord your God has promised you and given you for all time. If you do not, God will exile you and take the land away from you. The language it uses is the land will literally vomit the people out into exile. So right here, it's specifically talking about, remember, Lord your God, he promised you the land for all time.
Mhm.
That will happen if you're faithful like Abraham and obey his statutes and commandments.
Right. I
You
think that
don't.
language is very contradictory, and I take your point there. But again, I need you to take mine. Uh, Forget vomiting them out of the land. They never have the land. You got to have it before you're kicked out, before it's taken away from you. You can't have something taken away that you didn't have. And so you can say they had some small part of it, but
Hmm.
that wasn't the promise. So you're cherry picking the promise to this one small piece of land, and then you're also
Hmm.
kind of playing on this what I call kind of deceptive language, which is uh, it's yours forever unless you sin, and then I can take it away, which basically means that God can just take it away at any time because they're going to sin all the time. They're always sinning. What qualifies as them sinning? There's no qualification given from that. It's just whenever God says, "Yeah, that's enough," yank. Um, and so it's not really much of a promise. And since God knows that they're going to sin and how and when, it's not a promise he ever intends to keep because he knows exactly the time and date that they're going to do their sin, that he's going to say, okay, that's enough, yoink. It's very unclear. It's very misleading. It's very one sided. You would never enter a contract like that to say, look, as long as you are perfect, I will give you $1 million a month. Ah, man, look at that. You stepped in dog poop and you didn't clean your shoe properly. I'm going to stop the payments. That's it's not a real promise. It's not a real covenant. It's a fraud. It's a scam, but it's a scam that the people are stuck with because their identity is tied to it. And so they have to keep going through this deadly cycle of uh, we we reject God because he's not keeping his promises, so we're going to go worship Baal. Oh, well, that's not working out. We accept God. God is going to give us the thing that they never actually got. Oh, we sinned again. Oh, we repented again. Oh, we sinned again. In the meantime, this land that is it's the most physical part of the promise is a thing that whether they repented or not, they never actually owned.
Okay, so you raised something interesting about the morality of it. But before I go there, just a quick question to end this, because you're saying that they never owned the land ever. Obviously the Bible and the Old Testament, and I would disagree with that. But let me just ask you this. So in terms of the full
No,
border,
it doesn't.
the in terms of the full borders that are promised,
Mhm.
again, we agree Israel never had those borders as an autonomous nation in history up to this point. So we agree on
Right.
that historical fact. Would you agree that the when the Bible makes the promises about the boundaries, it doesn't say give us a temporal thing like, oh, you will have these boundaries by 500 BC or what in whatever language it uses. Does it give us temporal coordinates for when the borders have to be fulfilled that
I
rule
don't think
the
so.
future? Okay.
I don't think so. It would be helpful if it had. My case would be stronger, but my case would rest on the fact that he made those promises to them. And those promises kept being reiterated to them. And when God would get mad and come back, it would be to them. They had an expectation that that generation or some, you know, foreseeable future generations would receive that promise. And so if you're saying, well, it could be 5,000 years from that promise, I would say that you're wrong. I don't think it could be. Um,
Hmm.
if you're arguing in law litigiously, well, he didn't say when, maybe you have a point there, but if that's your God, you don't have a religion anyway.
Okay. So that does sound radical. So you're saying the text you cited was Genesis 15, a promise to Abraham. So Abraham
was supposed to own all of the land of Israel and all these things, and you never did.
Abraham was 99 years old, and I don't
This
know
was
that he had an expectation of that happening in his lifetime. What he had an expectation of his lifetime is that he would have kids. He's going to live for a little while. He's going to be well respected, something like a king. Uh, I'm trying to get into Abraham's head, which is hard to do. I don't think any historian can do it. But if you just read the text and just put yourself in the literature and the characters, uh, I think that would be Abraham's expectation. But it also wouldn't be his expectation that 5,000 years later, a piece of land is going to fall from heaven, and that's what God meant.
okay. Yeah, and I reread it. It's not to Abraham, but it's to his descendants, which again includes descendants in the future. So
Right.
yeah, the prophecy is just it doesn't give us any time coordinating. So I don't even think there's any general expectation of any particular generation there. But okay, last point. This is a really important one that you raised about the potential morality, because you're saying, well, if it's a contingent promise, it's not a real promise because God knows in advance they're gonna fail. They're gonna reach that threshold, and I think the Bible does tell us there is a certain threshold, right? It's if one person sins, that's not enough. It needs to be either someone who's representative of the nation, like the king or all the priests or something like that, and or
It doesn't actually spell that out though. In the same way the time coordinates um, aren't
yeah,
spelled out, and I have to concede that I you know, I can only speculate what the expectation was. I think you have to concede that you don't know what the threshold is, and neither did they.
I think they needed to know that it was the nation that was at fault as a corporate entity. I think that much is clear in the Bible. So clearly one person, one individual is not going to determine the fate of the nation of Israel and stuff like that.
David takes a sentence says 70,000 people are killed in 3 days.
Say that again. Sorry.
David takes a census, 70,000 people are killed in 3 days.
Right. Okay. But David, as a single individual, is the king who's the
The king
representative
can
of the
be
nation.
good. The king can choke on a chicken bone, and a newer, more righteous king can take his place. Just because a king dies doesn't mean that the nation dies. It just means that that particular reign dies. When Abraham sinned, God could have punished. I mean, God could have punished David for the sin and kept the continuity of the kingdom. So I strongly disagree with the idea that God is somehow bound to destroy 70,000 Jews because the king sinned, one person.
But
That,
that's
that that doesn't follow.
but that's consistently the king represents Israel as a nation. That's why his individual actions matter, and that's why we go through this is a bad king, this is a good king, good, bad, good, bad, good, bad, because their things affect the fate of the nation, kind of
Well,
thing, right?
God didn't destroy. I'm sorry for the quick interruption there. God didn't destroy Israel because Saul went crazy. He
Correct.
deposed Saul.
He
So
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, he's very patient and merciful at times, which means it's not a guarantee that, oh, if you're bad, I mean, King Ahaz was bad and God gave him another chance, kind of thing, through the prophet Isaiah.
this is why the threshold talk doesn't mean anything because it's so unspecific. You don't know what the threshold is. And once again, because it's never even hinted at being spelled out, they wouldn't know what it is either. It's just God is, I'm going to keep the promise, I'm going to not keep the promise. And he could do that at any time because people are constantly sinning. I use this analogy a lot. I talk about uh, in football, there's a constant battle between some of the most fit people in the world. It's the wide receiver and not the safety, the corner. They are they are practically fist fighting, uh, for 50 to 100 yards every play in a full out sprint. It doesn't matter whether the ball goes to them or not. That's the fight. The referee can throw a flag randomly doesn't even have to look, and it would be right because they're always interfering, both sides. Uh, when it comes to the offensive line, they could randomly throw a flag, randomly point at anybody on the line and say holding. And it's true because there is always holding. This is a part and parcel of the sport. It's the nature of it. It's just when it reaches a certain judgment call threshold, and when they feel like that, they throw the flag. But you at home can't sit there and say, he was supposed to throw that flag then. No, that's not exactly how it works. That's not how the sport works. And what you're saying is that God has set up a system where he could just throw the flag anytime because they're always going to sin. They're always sinning. We're all always sinning.
But it's not just like one sin. It's living with this, as the prophets say, with this wrong heart, unrelenting, unrepentant sin. So here's the threshold. It's still a vague one, but I think the Bible, this is the threshold. You will agree, it's explicit if the king or the leaders of Israel are living in sin, right? Not just, King David went after Bathsheba, but the whole nation wasn't destroyed. But it's if he's living unrepentantly in sin and worshiping pagan idols and stuff like that. So number one, if the leaders are, number two, if a significant portion of the population is living in idolatry and unrepentant sin, this puts you in breach of the covenant. That's undeniable. Now,
Well, I
where there's
will grant it
vagueness.
that that's possible. I don't grant that it's undeniable
Just let
because
me
it's just never laid out.
Okay, but let me finish my point, right? Because I
Okay.
want you to understand what the argument is.
Yeah.
But there's still a vagary to your point because just because they've breached the covenant, a lot of times God in His mercy will I'll put up with it. So that, in that sense, what all the Israelites could know is, well, look, if we breach the covenant in these ways, right? Either the king or us as the people, the majority of the people, or a huge proportion of the nation of Israel do this, then we are in this position of breach of the covenant. And then we just know that God could abandon the covenant at any time. He might not. He might be merciful and put up with it for centuries, or tomorrow we could be exiled. That's all they could know. There is that element. Will we be punished or not? And maybe that's why maybe that helps explain why the Israelites were so stupid from our perspective to go around worshiping idols when, I mean, weren't you around the last time God got mad? That you know what could happen. Well, maybe they thought, well, maybe it won't happen to us. It'll be 200 years from now or two generations down the line. We can get away with it.
Did you consider that they may go off and worship idols because God wasn't the kind of God that kept his promises? I mean, we're so quick to vilify uh, that, but God kept not one single promise over a long time, over many generations. Yeah, you're going to go off and maybe find some other gods. I don't think that's entirely unreasonable. And, when you say, well, don't you remember the last time? Well, oftentimes these things were separated by hundreds of years. So, no, you don't remember the last time. That was some vague folk tale that the old people used to tell each other. So, no, I don't. We read the Bible as if it all happened, in the course of 3 days. That is not how it happened. And so I think that we have to cut even the characters of the biblical Jews a little bit of slack.
So here's why I would disagree with that. And I don't know if you remember, this is my interesting idea, but it's because they are responsible. The nation of Israel is responsible. The people did know better about these things because of the Holy Spirit. Remember, the divine presence is dwelling in their midst in the temple, and that gave them access to properly basic beliefs and stuff like that other nations wouldn't have. So that's why it was so important when God abandoned. It's not like, oh, God's just chilling in the temple. It has no effect on the land. That the Bible understands. No, when He's dwelling in your midst, it comes with certain entailments and benefits. And I would argue that includes properly basic beliefs. And about, yeah, this is true. God is the one true God. He did this for us and stuff. So I think they did know, again, to the extent that they were living rightly. Once they abandoned God and were sinning, well, then just like the Holy Spirit with us today, you're not receptive to it and stuff like that. And eventually God has to abandon the temple altogether and the effects of the land.
Right. I hear you. That's a fairly common Christian strategy in the current age. It was a strategy in the New Testament, and you talk like a New Testament Christian. You also talk like an Old Testament prophet who's trying to find a way to blame it all on the people and
Well, what do you
explain
think?
away why
Sorry.
none of the promises are true. I get it. Um,
Wait,
you know,
pretend I am full of, what about the prophets, right? Because when God was about to punish people, he would send them prophets that they recognized and said, "You're going to be destroyed," and they willfully said, "Ha ha ha, we're going to keep doing it. We love our sin." And then he does send them a warning, even by if you reject everything I just said about the Holy